Welcome back to Racing Rundown here on YouTube. I'm Eric DeCoster. In this preview, we will be taking a look at the Grade 1 $1 million Toyota Bluegrass, a key Kentucky Derby prep, as I imagine most listening are familiar with. A very historic, productive race. Hasn't produced a Kentucky Derby winner in a handful of years, but this has been a very, very strong Triple Crown race prep. It's produced a winner of a Triple Crown race in 4 of the last 5 years of its running, and even the one that didn't had a horse that ran second in the Kentucky Derby in Good Magic. But just going through the names, it's easy to see why this race got back up to a Grade 1, rightfully so. I mean, never should have been downgraded, but the last handful of years have proven it deserves that Grade 1 status. Essential Quality won this race, won the Belmont, went on to be 3-year-old champion. The year before that, Art Collector, Grade 1 winner himself at 4. And Swiss Skydiver was second and won the Preakness. 3 years ago, Vacoma, he became a Grade 1 winner at 4, and up the track in that race was Belmont winner Sir Winston. Already touched on Good Magic. You go back to 2017, that race was won by a maiden in IRAP, but at the same time, Tappert ran 5th, and he won the Belmont. And Practical Joke won a Grade 1 after that. And you go a year before that, 2016, tons of productivity along the Triple Crown Trail there with the likes of Cherry Wine, Lauban, so on and so forth. This race has just always been good, always been productive, and I'm excited to see what we can get out of it this year. A field of 12 lined up, a very competitive field. You can make a case for most of them, which is why we're going to dive into each and every one briefly before I give out my thoughts on how the race will play out and then my picks. But at the end of the day, we're here to try and help you figure out who you want to go with, not so much talk about what we like. So we'll go to the one, Commandperformance, a maiden still, but Grade 1 placed, was second in the Champagne in his second career start at Belmont. And that was a very strong performance, so much so that he went to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, was very highly touted there, single digits, probably third or fourth choice off the top of my head. And he ran a pretty credible race. I mean, he was very, very close to the early pace, something that we hadn't seen from his first 2 starts. He'd been pretty far back in the early stages and then kind of swept and made one big run. Whereas in the Juvenile, Irad Ortiz really put him in the game from an outside post, and it seemed like he just kind of flattened out in the lane. And that's a valid excuse, but the Juvenile form has been very bad. And then we saw him take a huge class drop, running a maiden at Tampa on Tampa Bay Derby Day. And Tampa Bay Downs maidens can be pretty productive, but this was not good. He was beaten 5 1/4 lengths by Fenwick, who does actually turn up in this race as well, but he should have beat that group. And I mean, it's very tough when you have a horse who, sure, he's done some good things and he's ran some big races, but he doesn't know how to win. And against this level, that doesn't bode any confidence in my mind. I mean, he's a good horse, and maybe he does step up second off the layoff and all of these great things, and Todd Pletcher certainly knows how to get him geared up for the target, and this was certainly the target for this horse for quite a while, it seems. So if he can sit a good trip, and Irad Ortiz can make the moves, and most importantly, he's figured out how to actually win. And if he can do that, then he'll be in decent shape. I just question. I don't know against this level of horses if he can put it all together. We move on to the 2 Fenwick. That's the horse that beat Commandperformance at big odds. He was 21-1 on the day, and rightfully so. He had been pretty disappointing, to say the least. A couple last place finishes, one at Aqueduct, one at Fairgrounds, and one average race at Fairgrounds in between. For a horse who started his career off really well, he was a good second behind a nice horse at Chad Brown's named Forest Raking, who we haven't seen since, but is highly touted from that barn. So obviously you'd hope he would be doing a lot better. Fenwick would be. Then he switched trainers to a very low percentage guy. I mean, David Fisher, honestly, a trainer I'd never heard of. Only 21 starts in the past year and only 3 wins, and Fenwick was one of them. He went wire to wire that day in that maiden score on March 12th over Commandperformance and set the pace nicely, and then drew off 1 by over 5. I will say the race does kind of play well into his hand. He is the only horse that found himself on the lead in their last start. I think there'll be a couple, obviously, that will be more forwardly placed and give him a challenge, but the pace does work into his favor. I just don't think he has enough bat class behind him to really factor in here. So unless he can really slow it down, and he's really improved in these 2 starts since being switched out of the Asmussen barn, then I'm failing to see where he has a big chance. The 3 is Trademark, horse who's contended on the Derby Trail in 2 races, both down at Tampa, Sam F. Davis and Tampa Bay Derby. Sam Davis was tough. He's a horse who, well, let's actually just go back to his 2 wins before that. He broke his maiden at Churchill pretty nicely by 5, in fact, then won an allowance over a couple stakes winners at that. In career start number 2 on the Stars of Tomorrow card, and then he goes just to Tampa, runs into Sam Davis, but he doesn't get to the lead, and that's how he's won both of his races, going wire to wire, and he didn't get that on that in that spot to Sam Davis, and it cost me. He ran last, beating 33 lengths. In the Tampa Bay Derby, he was able to be a little bit more comfortable. Wasn't on the lead, but he was able to sit a much more comfortable stalking trip than he did in the Sam Davis, and he ran fifth, beating only 3 1/4 lengths. And I thought it was a very strong effort for a horse who didn't look that good in stakes company before this, and it showed a much bigger step up, and his figures definitely now fit. If you toss out that Sam Davis, he's probably second tier in here, but it's better than horses that'll definitely take more money than him at times. So there's certainly positives when it comes to Trademark, and I think the biggest thing is if Rafael Bejarano puts him in the game early on, like he was in his 2 career wins when he found himself on the lead. If he can go up with Fenwick and they can play nice, they can find themselves running big races, better races than they probably should, just from a pace standpoint. And that's really going to be his best shot, because clearly he's been outmatched at the stakes level in his prior 2 runs this year, and it doesn't get any easier here. But at the same time, if he can trip out, well, then you're going to be in excellent shape. So certainly trying to weigh those positives and negatives. He's not one I really think can win, but maybe a price you can throw underneath. And the keyword there is definitely maybe. The 4 is Zandon. I feel like he'll go off favored, but he's your morning line second choice. But it'll be close no matter what. Him and Smile Happy, the 2 that exit the Risen Star, where he was only a half length behind Smile Happy, and then beaten 2 3/4 lengths more to Epicenter from Smile Happy. But hey, Epicenter just came back and dominated the Louisiana Derby himself, and is some consider him to be the Kentucky Derby favorite right now. So clearly good form. And before that, a nose loss to Modonegal, who's another horse who's going to be favored this weekend in a key Derby prep, or at least I think he should be. And if he's not, well, then that's a huge loss for whoever is betting against him. But point is, Zandon's been keeping great class and great company. The 3 horses he's lost to are all tried and true top-level Kentucky Derby contenders, and that bodes well for him. And it's not like he can't win. His maiden win was very nice, and he duked it out very well. Should have won the Remsen based off how you view that disqualification. And the Risen Star was a great race because it was the first time we had to see him face some adversity. He came from well off the pace after blowing the brake and closed really nicely under Jose Ortiz, picked up a lot of ground. And honestly, if he didn't blow the brake and was more forwardly placed, he very well could have won the race, in my opinion, or at least been a very close second. So another thing is he's tactical. I mean, he can go up and stalk if he needs to. He can come from pretty far back if he needs to, as you displayed in the Risen Star. There's good positives around him. I mean, he's got a killer work tab. Flavian Pratt gets aboard. That's probably the biggest plus. I mean, that guy can ride like no other, in my opinion. And when he teams up with Chad Brown, it's a lethal combination. And I can see it here with Zandon. He needs I think the biggest thing here is not getting too far back, because Keeneland in general, not an easy track to close at. You can pick up the ground, but you're not going to win. You'll hit the board, but you're not going to get to the line first. And that seems ever more apparent in this race. That kind of lacks some really early pace. And the versatility is there, and Flavian Pratt will certainly put him in a spot that he feels is best, because he's always very good at that. But my worry is if someone better, or someone very close to him on talent at least, because I think he's probably the most talented horse in the race, but if someone that is close enough to him on talent, and you can probably, we'll figure out who I'm hinting at in a few horses, if someone can get first run on him and get the split and have a few length advantage heading into the stretch, I don't know if he can make it up and win it. So it'll be interesting to see. That's my only knock against him, but on form, he's certainly the best in my opinion. The 5 is Volcanic. This horse has been very, very good this year. In 2 starts, his maiden score, in January, first start of the year, 2 starts back, 4th start of his career, he beat Charge It in a thrilling stretch duel. I mean, that was a very, very exciting race to watch, and he got it by a neck, and they were 12.5 lengths clear third. And of course, what Charge It has gone on to do now, establish himself into the Kentucky Derby with his Florida Derby runner-up effort last weekend. That has to give you some excitement around Volcanic, who also I thought ran a really good third in his start after that to Sam Davis, where he was third, beaten almost 5 lengths, but Classic Causeway kind of dominated that, and I thought Volcanic did a lot of good things. As a 2-year-old, he was good. He was precocious. He was third, beaten just a neck in career start number 2. Mark Cassidy had so much hope in him. He ran him in the Grade 1 Hopeful as a maiden, and he didn't. It just didn't go well. I mean, he was outclassed on the day, but also had some trouble. But he's come back this year and done a lot of good things. He's developed along nicely. I think that looking at him physically and the pedigree, that downside really does boost him up, in my opinion, when it comes to distance. Violence, Offspring, I tend to think more as one-turn types. But this guy seems like he can stretch it at least to a mile and an eighth. So I think he's intriguing, maybe a price horse, and if he can set a nice stalking trip, sit third or fourth early on, he could be a contender to hit the board for sure. The 6 is Emmanuel. At one point, people thought he might be the Derby favorite after his allowance win in January at Tampa. He broke his maiden by 6 3/4, followed that up with that Tampa victory by 4.5. He is just a very good racehorse. However, in the Fountain of Youth, things did not go his way. He broke a touch slow, got shuffled in behind. A race that looked like it was going to set up where you're going to have a lot of horses jostling for the same 3 positions. He was one of those 6 or 7 that wanted to do that. And it was very evident in his run throughout because he just got jostled around and bumped around and still finished off well enough. He kind of ran his race throughout, and then for him to run fourth still was very impressive. And Simplification's good. In Due Time is a decent horse. So it's not like he was losing to slouches on top of that. I thought he ran a very credible race. And I think what really puts him in good position here is the tactical advantage I think he'll have. He'll be able to sit a really nice stalking trip. I know I mentioned the 2 horses I think are going to go to the lead in Fenwick and Trademark. I think Volcanic will be a close third, and I think Emmanuel is going to set up right off of them. So he's going to be third or fourth or fifth early on, and that's going to be really beneficial to him in a race that looks like it'll have a slow pace. And if he can get first run and show what he showed in his first 2 starts, he could be very dangerous in here. The 7 Golden Glider, very, very nice start to his career. Broke his maiden at Woodbine, followed it up with, the Tampa form here is crazy the more I look at it. There's so many horses here coming from Tampa. This is another one, an allowance win in January. He then went to the Sam Davis, ran 5th behind Volcanic and a handful of others. And then Tampa Bay Derby, he was picking up nicely late. He was about a half length really from running second. So that's a positive. And I don't hold it against anybody for losing to Classic Causeway. He's much better than what he showed in the Florida Derby. So when it comes to Golden Glider, he's a good horse. He picks it up. It seems like he just is always third or fourth best in every stakes race he's ran in to this point. I really just don't see that changing as the field gets tougher this time around. The 8 is Ethereal Road. Obviously, great story with Dwayne Lucas here, the trainer, a horse who broke his maiden so impressively. Made up 16 lengths at one point. After absolutely blowing them. You go watch the street play, January 29th, race 11 at Oaklawn. He had no business winning this race, and he still won it by 4. And then he backed it up with a really nice second in the Rebel, where he was actually involved in the race early on and looked like he was going to win until Unoho surged up the rail to get the job done. So I'm really only taking those 2 races. His form as a 3-year-old, he was beating himself in those 3 races. So looking at his 2 races from this year, they've been very good. However, I just don't think the Arkansas Derby Trail has been good at all this year. I think the Rebel, I know Unoho had his excuses. I know Barber Road still ran a good second in the Arkansas Derby, but those are horses that are overmatched if they run in here or maybe even the Wood, Santa Anita Derby. You look at the 3 preps, really any 100-point prep that has been run to this point. The horses that ran in the Arkansas Derby, I don't think would have had a chance to win that race. So I think that this will be tough for Ethereal Road. I think as much as I'd like to see him succeed for these connections, he just seems pretty weak across the board and a bit overpowered by a weak competition more so than anything. If he can win, great. I'll be happy to be wrong. I just really don't see it working out for him here. I just don't think he's this kind of level. The 9 is Rattle N Roll, Grade 1 winner at Keeneland last year in the Breeders' Futurity. Part of a 2-race win streak he put together towards the end of last year. Was injured heading into the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. That's why he didn't take up a spot in there. However, this year's been disappointing. The Fountain of Youth, I gave him the excuses because the race didn't really set up for him. It was a slow pace, and he was picking up late. But with the pace in front of him, of course you're going to run 6 feet and 7 1/4 lengths. Louisiana Derby, it was kind of a merry-go-round as well. Epicenter sat third early on, took over and beat the horses that sat 1-2 early on in Zozos and Pioneer of Medina. So yeah, they kind of merry-go-rounded it there, but this is another race I don't think the pace is going to really play into his hand, and that's a bit of a concern. He's also coming off of, a 2-week layoff. That's not great. He adds blinkers. Ken McPeak only wins at 9% and is in the money 24% of the time when he adds blinkers, so it's not a very strong angle there. There's just a lot playing against him. The pace, the bad form, the quick turnaround, adding blinkers, all of these different things. So really the only benefit is that he's won a Grade 1 at Keeneland in the Breeders' Futurity, and the record of horses that have won the Breeders' Futurity and have won the Bluegrass as well is pretty lengthy. It's kind of surprising how much that works, but this does not seem like the type that can do it. He does not fit the mold, and I would like to see him succeed. I just don't think it happens. His stablemate, however, the 10, Smile Happy, he very well could. 2 for 2 to start his career, has been the favorite in multiple Kentucky Derby future wager pools, rightfully so. He was very dominant in his first 2 races. Then the risen start, he ran a great race. Epicenter stole it on the front end, no big deal. He still rallied well, but he was just ahead in front of Zandon. I mean, he's a very classy, talented horse, and he'll either be the morning line favorite or it'll be Zandon. But he is another one I do worry about the race setup because he likes to come from off the pace, and if they go slow enough where maybe the speed can't hold because they're not talented enough, but those stalkers like a Volcanic or an Emmanuel can take advantage and get that first run. That's going to be the most. If they can get the first run, they could be good as gone. Now, that being said, we saw last year the Kentucky Jockey Club, Classic Causeway and White Barrio were technically allowed first run, and Smile Happy did gun them down, and they're 2 very talented horses who have won big races along this Kentucky Derby trail. So that's something you have to counterbalance. Is he good enough to run down anybody that gets first run on him, or is he just going to be second best and he's going to be a must play in the Kentucky Derby? I think it could go both ways for sure. He's going to hit the board. He's going to run his race. He's a very consistent, very talented animal. I'm hesitant to say yes, he can absolutely win this because of how the race sets up. The 11 is Blackadder. Very interesting type. This is one of those Baffert horses who would switch barns. This one did not go to Tim Yachteen, so no Baffteen here, but we can go Baffset or Briffert, whatever you want to say. Point is, this is a Bob Baffert horse disguised as a different trainer. I know that, the rules and whatnot, he's not being trained by Bob Baffert, and Bob Baffert's not allowed to have contact with Rudolph Brissett, which probably, if they're following the rules, great. I would hope they would, because obviously that could become very messy. But point being, this horse is on a Baffert training regiment, more than likely still, just under a different trainer's name. So for Blackadder, of course, he's coming off of his El Camino Real Derby win, but that's reaching on 2 months away now. So that's a little interesting, and that was, of course, a very weak field. Running down McKinnon is impressive in itself, but outside of that, there's not much to it. And then 2 starts ago, it was a good maiden win at Santa Anita on their opening day. It was an off-the-turf race. He made up a ton of ground that day, and he ran down Cantaro Doro, a horse who actually placed in the stakes at Maidan last year. So he's coming off of 2 good races, and before that, he kind of just needed some more time, it felt. So he's not a bad horse. I mean, I was very well prepared to pick him last week in the Jeff Ruby if he got a better post. I thought he was going to be great in there, but I think that's why they scratched the post, and then, of course, they get hung out wide in post 11 here, so not really working in their favor. He seems decent, but is he really better than Smile Happy, Zandon, Emmanuel, maybe even a couple others in here? I don't think so. Therefore, I think he's a pass. If he'd ran last week, he would have been in the Kentucky Derby, but this seems like an uphill climb for him. The 12 is Grantham, final horse in this field, and I appreciate everyone that's stuck around this long because obviously there's a lot of horses to go to, and because they're all pretty talented, you want to give them their fair share. So for Grantham, Mike Maker has done some good work with this horse after running into a tough horse on debut at Churchill. Comes back, doesn't do as much in that Turfway, maiden win. It was good, but it wasn't dazzling. And then he runs in the Withers, where he's rightfully a small price, and he still ran 4th. And of course, the form of that's been flattered by Unaho winning the Rebel and so on and so forth. There's been some decent form out of there. Obviously, he ran 2nd in the Tampa Bay Derby. Grantham himself, he's kind of promoted the Withers as a better race. He helped it get the buyer bump and all those good things. In Tampa, he ran a very strong. He's had a great stalking trip early on, made a good move, and he couldn't match Classic Causeway, which is very fair. Classic Causeway is a very good horse, as I said multiple times on this preview. But you couldn't help but like how he fought on. He does run kind of evenly. It seems like he's a horse that wants to run all day with that pedigree, and that's where I think he's going to get bit. He might be a good Belmont horse in all honesty. I just don't think that he has enough for that turn of foot to really take command when necessary at these kinds of distances. And that's why I just don't think he's a winning contender here. I like this horse a lot. You can ask anybody. I've actually been very high on this horse for a long time. I just don't like what he displays going these kinds of distances. If he can get out longer, that's where I think we'll see his best. But he's a little too flat and even for my liking in a race like the Bluegrass. So obviously we've gone through the field. I kind of laid out how I think the race will set up with the 2 and the 3s, Fenwick and Trademark, setting out to the lead, and then your likely horses that'll go in stalk or press, however you want to call it, Volcanic, Emmanuel, and Grantham. But they're going to play nice, and I think you'll probably see something between a 47-3 up to a 48-1 kind of half mile here. I'd be really shocked to see them completely duke it out. I think there'll be horses up there but I think they'll play nice to each other. And because of that, I think Emmanuel's going to kind of trip out in here. I think if he sits the good stalking trip, the talent will push him through. He'll be able to hold off closing Zandon and Smile Happy, and that'll put him over. So I think Emmanuel, it's hard to say it can get crazy underneath because there's a lot of talent in those other two I mentioned. So you might get your small third choice on top over the two favorites, and that'll give you a nice little payout in some way, shape, or form. I think you use all three in multi-race wagers and call it a day. It's going to be a fun field race, competitive field. Obviously, Derby points on the line, more important than anything. And it could go a handful of ways. I'm really excited. I could definitely see me getting beat here with Emmanuel by either of those two favorites, and maybe even some of these mild prices like a Volcanic even, or so on and so forth. So it's going to be a fun race. I appreciate you sticking around and taking a listen to this preview. We'll have more. We have plenty of previews coming for the rest of the weekend. Both of those Derby preps, the Grade 1 Madison as well. So exciting times here on Racing Rundown, and we'll see you next time.